Hi, I'm Peri, and in the semester of spring 2015, I am the Vice President of the New Paltz LARP Club. I have done 2 videos before this, one about character creation, and I helped you guys learn how to make characters, and another one was, LARP etiquette and how to not be a jerk when you're role-playing. Now, when I made that second video, I actually did cover something that I'm going to be covering today, which is bleed out. In that video, what I discussed was how bleed out can often lead to less than favorable interactions, namely by rudeness, arguments, or just in general not making it so that people don't have a good time. Today, I'm going to be talking about something a bit different. I'm going to be talking about the focus on the person who's actually bleeding out. Now, before we start, I should probably define what bleed out is. Bleed out is not dying. It is not bleeding out, which is a common term to mean that you will die. Bleeding out, or bleed, as it's commonly known in other places, essentially is a tactic where you are not completely separate from your character. Maybe your character bleeds into you and you end up with emotions of them. So maybe they're very gruff and you're not, and then you feel very gruff afterwards and you don't know why. It could also mean that you become very invested in the LARP and invested in the world as if it was just as important as the real world. Or, alternatively, you find that your own emotions are getting into your character. Maybe your character is strong and doesn't care what people think, but you do. So when, people say, man, your character, asshole, right? Instead of saying, yes, my character, but they don't care, you think, no, I care. I'm sad. So those are some examples. And, is this a bad thing? Well, actually, that's a more complicated question than you might realize. It's important to realize that LARP is very diverse. LARP is not what you think it is. You see movies like Role Models and Knights of Badassdom, which is a horrible movie, don't see it. And in these movies, it's fantasy LARPs and, elves and dwarves, and to a certain extent, our LARP's a fantasy LARP, but it's very different no matter where you go. You have some that are just pure combat. There's a documentary of Darkon, which you might have seen. It's pretty common, and it's a good look at it, but it's a very combat-based LARP, and in that world, if you decide to betray your friends in the game, then you've also probably betrayed them in real life, and that can break friendships. In our LARP, if you betray a friend in LARP, it does not carry over into real life unless there is behind-the-scenes problems. And in Europe, there are also many LARPs that are very different. You might have seen some advertisements for like a Battlestar Galactica LARP or a Harry Potter LARP, and even then, you might have LARPs that are very much more mundane, like a modern-day political LARP or something like that. So with that in mind, there's kind of 2 separate mentalities for bleed out. For instance, in horror LARPs, LARPs that try to scare you, there is this idea that bleed out is kind of needed. I could try and scare your character as much as I want, but I will be more successful trying to scare you, or vice versa, in the sense of if I can get to your character scared, I can eventually get you scared. But at the end of the day, if the person isn't scared, the LARP character being scared is not going to be as convincing or as enjoyable for the person. If they're going to a horror LARP, they probably want to be scared. So in that sense, it's probably expected and enjoyed. Other LARPs encourage it because it means you are more invested. If you don't care as much about a fictional character, you're not going to cry when they die. You're not going to cry when buildings get destroyed. You're not going to cry when something bad happens. You're not going to feel the emotional pull that the writers are probably trying to wring out of you. So that's one side of things. The US is a bit different. We tend to see character and person as separate entities, and it helps because we do a lot of fantasy LARP, so it's a lot easier to separate yourselves when you're an elf who believes in certain types of magic or something, because it has no real world equivalent, kind of. Regardless of the explanation, there is that divide. Now, I'm from the US myself, and English-speaking American, woo. So I'm going to be speaking for the rest of this video from a US perspective. If you disagree with this perspective, I am sorry. You may either click out of the video or just listen and disagree the entire time, but from now on I will be speaking from that perspective. I will not be speaking from the Nordic perspective. I have never been to a Nordic LARP. I've never been to a European LARP. I have never been in a situation where I could have done that. So I do not feel comfortable talking about what happens in Nordic LARPs because I've not been to one myself. If you have, make your own video or link me a video. I'd be interested in learning more. Alright. So now that we've established the differences, let's go into why, from a U.S. perspective, we tend to see it as bad. And I've given information for it. This can lead to bad vibes, just uncomfortableness, or overinvestment. And this can be an issue because it can ruin the enjoyment of others. But that's not the point of this video. I discussed it at length in character etiquette, so I'm going to focus it on the person. Lead out can hurt and can also be really isolating because what happens is that you can't exactly tell your friend that you see the next day, oh yeah, I'm depressed because I went to a LARP and my character saw something traumatizing or did something and I messed up, or someone died but they're fictional. You can't really say that. You can't get the amount of sympathy. You can't get that feedback. You can't go and complain about it on Facebook and get a bunch of likes. Within reason. People aren't going to see it that way. And even if they do, you're not going to feel the same way talking about it. Because it's a situation you're not normally in, because usually it's a situation you didn't create for yourself. Either your character was so different that you yourself wouldn't normally do this, or you wouldn't normally be in a position where you are making odds that completely destroy like the world, or fix the world, or just put the world at stake. That usually doesn't happen. And in LARPs, you usually have much higher stakes, especially the dystopian ones and the ones that are in the middle of the war. You just get so much pressure and high stakes, and horrible things can happen that you normally don't see every day, and that's just jarring. It's horrifying. So you can't talk to anyone because they're gonna think you're weird or petty or not focused on actual problems like taxes or actual life problems like oppression and wars. Anyway, so what do? Well, there's a few things. One is to swallow your shame or gut or whatever it is and talk about it. Maybe not with people who are there, but other LARPers. One of the best ways is to talk to the people out of character and just vent a bit. After our LARPs, we almost always go together and we just talk and we go over the event and we just blurt it all out, and it helps. It actually really does help. Sometimes there will be issues, but I'll get to that later. And it can just let everyone know that who you are and what's going on. And this is a good time to gauge the interest, make fun of your own character, make fun of other people's characters, have them make fun of you, just back and forth dialogue, and basically put in a safe, more mundane, more fantastical place. I find making jokes are really helpful, just really silly, over the top jokes. Maybe you fumbled on something, so you just mime you make a big fall, and you're like, yeah, I just suck at running, man, and then everyone enjoys it, and then you talk about that, because it is fictional. So what you can do is, if you make it more extreme in the aftermath, and you laugh at it, and it becomes the inside joke, it becomes less personal, and becomes less, constricted around your heart, like it's trying to suffocate you. I've experienced bleed out personally, so any metaphors I give are from my own experience. Alright, so that's the main thing, talking to people. However, that's not always easy. For instance, what do you do when you are too invested in LARP? What do you do when you would rather skip your classes, skip your job, in order to worry about LARP or contribute to LARP? What would you do if you don't care anymore about what happens so long as your LARP character is okay? And what happens if your LARP character dies? Or something you cared about gets doomed, or you leave because you're sick and someone else takes control, and as a result something bad happens. These can also lead to a type of bleed out because you are invested heavily in this, and it just goes away because it is a fictional world, and fictional worlds are very easily constructed and also easily dismantled. This is tougher, and there are many ways to do it and to fix it. Unfortunately, sometimes the best way to do it is to take a break and to leave LARP for a while. And this is a very hard thing to say because many people enjoy it, and some people use it as their beacon of hope and the thing they look forward to. The problem is that when you look forward to too much, it kind of becomes codependent. As a LARPer, I've seen people who become like this, and it is heartbreaking. It really is. I've seen people who neglected their studies to go to LARP, and especially since LARP can be a full-time job, a full-time experience, because you get LARPers together, they're going to talk about LARP. They're going to talk about the interactions. They're probably going to run mini interactions on their own because it's fun. Especially if this is like a local LARP that can meet like easily. Like if it's once a month, then people might be further away. But if it's like once a week, like my LARP is, it's way easier. And obviously the once a year LARPs are probably way different. But it can be hard. And another thing is to try and like find other hobbies. Try and find something else. Also, roleplay in other places. This is a weird thing, but having a LARP as your main thing kind of puts all the weight on that LARP. But if you have a LARP, a tabletop, and a video game, and maybe a book you're writing on the side, then you can spread yourself out, and then you can invest into different characters. This is why I often encourage people to like play alts or NPC and stuff, because it's a good idea to separate themselves from their character to a certain extent. Because oftentimes when people first come in, they either play their self-inserts, who are them, and thus they experience it, or their babies, who are their precious characters that they love more than anything and would never want to see die or hurt or anything. And in those cases, it's often better if they do take a break from them and they stop role-playing them for a while and play other people. And two things happen. One, either they never connect again, which is unfortunate, but what are you going to do? Or they realize that there's more than one way to make a character, and there's more than one way to be a person, and that can really help. Someone who's more likely to experience bleed out will probably always experience bleed out, but it does mean that they'll understand it better. They'll cope with it more, because now it's not so intrinsically tied to their character. It's no longer, I am feeling this way because of my character. It's because I'm feeling this way because this is how LARP works, and I'm going to deal with it. So, talking about it, taking a break, mixing it up with characters, especially if you're playing a depressed character and it's rubbing off on you. This is the most imperative time to switch a character in alt for a bit. I cannot stress that enough. Or even a character that's just slightly messing with your mind in a way you don't like. If it is something that is too intense or too much for you, don't do it. Alright? If you're confident in yourself, go ahead. I am not going to stop you. I'm a voice on the internet. But if you're a new LARPer, or if you really do feel more miserable than not, don't do it. Alright, so what if you're the LARP club, or the organization, or the group of people? You're the ones in charge. You're the ones writing plot and stuff. What do you do to help? Well, this is where it gets a bit easier and harder at the same time. Because one, just because you're in charge doesn't mean you're immune from bleed out. And I am vice president at this time, but like I said, I also experience bleed out, and it can be tough because I have to be an authority figure. I have to be the rock. I have to be confident at all times. So to a certain extent, I don't get the chances. I don't want to do this. I feel cruddy. I just want to curl into a ball and be annoyed at everyone. So, but this is, of course, why people who are usually in charge are usually veterans to some extent. They know what to do, they know how to deal with it, and they're going to suck it up and just power through. So what do you do for the new LARPers? Well, one thing is to keep an eye on them. Just pay attention. Make sure you're friendly, and if you play a harsh character, talk to them outside of it. And make sure they're okay. And gauge their interests, see what issues they had. In our LARP, we have an internal PR, which is a very important position, and that person is essentially someone who we say, if you have any issues, you have any complaints, please talk to them. Now, as I said before, people tend to not complain about this issue much, so you're probably wondering, why would they go to an internal PR? Well, there is a small bias in new players that actually helps us a lot, is that they don't always realize the difference between in and out of character issues. So, they will come to the internal PR being like, oh, this person's a jerk. Like, they shouldn't be allowed here. Like, why are they so mean? Or something like that. Or they did this horrible thing. Oh my, whatever. And in this case, it allows the internal PR to not only see what's going on, but also help them in something they didn't even know they had. I've seen this happen a couple times. It doesn't always happen, but it's something to keep in mind. The option is always good to have, because even if the new LARPers or someone doesn't realize what the actual issue is, it means that you as the organization can help and can make it so that they are good and that they will come back. And if you are a profit LARP, then they will spend more money, and that is good. Yes. Another thing is to, basically, one is, depending on your LARP, not to have it a parade of pain. LARPs love their dark moments. We all do. But if you make it too dark all the time, people get exhausted. People get tired. And it's just, even if it's the darkest LARP, it's always good to have a ray of sunshine somewhere. Maybe a funny character, maybe something silly, maybe just a wacky adventure, or maybe just out of nowhere a plot happens. A filler episode. Filler episodes in LARP are okay. In fact, sometimes those are the most beloved because they can do anything. And when you're not sticking to that overarching plot, you can get pretty creative. So those are some ways to lessen the bleed out. And of course, there is the opposite. If you want to increase the bleed out, because you are either looking for that or you disagree with me, then that's where you go the opposite route. You make sure people get invested, and they get invested hard, and then you hit them hard, and you hit them repeatedly. It's like you write a story. You gotta know what to do. Alright. I've talked for 15 minutes now. Alright. So, as a LARPer, it's important to know a few more things before I sign off here. 1, this is not unique to LARP. Actors in theater productions and actors in TV shows often experience this as well, because they have to get into character, do something new, or just the same thing, and then get out of character. And because it's theater, because it's TV, they often have to do it for a very long period of time, over and over and over and over and over and over again in a semi-consistent manner, which is a bit different than movies where it's 6 months, and then you're done. So from there, so it's not just us, and you're not alone. And even if you don't think you experience bleed out, and if you don't, good for you. You might be surprised that sometimes you do. Sometimes it just depends on the type of character you play, or sometimes it just is because it needs to be a specific emotion. There are many ways for people to experience bleed out and then they not even realize it. And sometimes you do it just in a very positive way. Maybe you attacked something and you won, so for the rest of the week you're happy and you feel like you can do anything. That's technically a form of bleed out. It's just that's a positive form of bleed out, thus we don't have to worry about it. All in all, bleed out is very diverse and varied, but if you feel like your character is affecting you out of character, you have to make 1 or 2 very important decisions. 1, you decide it's not a big deal. Your character's bleeding into you, so what? You also get bleed out every time like some character on a TV show dies. This is par for the course for you. In which case, you go on ahead with your life. You move on, you have fun, and you experience it, and that's that. Or you decide that, no, this is something that's worth addressing. This is something that you don't want to experience every time or without help. And that's when you come to the people in charge, or just your friends, and you set something up and you talk about it and you go over it and you make a safe place for yourself, because that is really important. So whichever decision you decide, it's important to know that there are many ways to do a LARP, many ways to have characters be attached to you, and just in general, many, many ways for this to occur. So it's up to you to decide what you're going to do about it, whether it's a big deal or not, or whether I'm right or not. This is a very touchy issue, and many people don't like admitting it. Many people really like the attachments they have to their characters. I disagree for the reasons I've stated aside in this, is that it can really hurt people. It can really doom them. I've seen people fail out because of it, or at least drop out. People get very mad, very sad, very emotional, and not in a good way. But that's just my opinion. My overall recap is, if you or someone you know you think is experiencing bleed out, you should come and talk to the people in charge or do something about it. The worst thing you can do is, if someone or you is feeling hurt by this, is to not say anything. Alright, so that's all I have to say. I will hopefully be making another video soon, but until then, it's been lovely talking to you.